Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 11th episode of Popcorn Mango. I am Razorblade Mango, and today gonna give you my quick thoughts of The Birth of a Nation, which is one of the big, Oscar hopefuls this year. It it was bought at a record amount at Sundance. I think it was like $17.5 million that Fox Searchlight paid for the rights to the film. And it has a wide release right now. And it is a very, very lazy film. There's just no other way to say it. I'm very little mystified as to why Fox Searchlight paid so much to get the rights of this film. I mean, maybe because it was just about slavery. I guess they thought they had another 12 years a slave on their hands where they could get another they could have another Academy Award sweep, I guess. Um because I mean, it has all the hallmarks for, an Oscar bait film. It's got, the central performance. That's lots of crying and shouting. You've got the overly stylized, artsy kind of filming that the movie has. You've got the controversial aspect, the aspect that ties it to modern times, with, of course, this being a sort of a reflection on what's going on with our current political climate, particularly with something like, the Trayvon Martin incident, the Baltimore riots, all that kind of stuff. Um, so, so I guess I want to say, first of all, that I honestly don't. When I went to go see this, I knew about Nate Parker, who's the writer, director, and star of the film. I knew about his acquitted rape charges back in 1999. And I want to make this, perfectly clear that my thoughts on that trial and why he was acquitted and what he could have done do not affect my thoughts on the film itself. I am able to divorce my feelings on the people involved with the film from the film itself. Like, I think Mel Gibson is a kind of a piece of shit as a human being, but that's not going to stop me from going to see Hacksaw Ridge, which I'm very much looking forward to, and enjoying his performance in Bloodfather, which is a good film, and he gives a great performance in that. So I want to make this clear that I am not judging the film based on what he might or might not have done in the past, namely rape in this situation. So, and I've already seen people throwing that out there, people criticizing this movie, like, "Oh, well, you're criticizing this movie because of your thoughts on Nate Parker." Well, I'm not. I am not, at least. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if there were people that do criticize the movie because of, personal thoughts on Nate Parker, but I am not one of them. So I want you guys to keep that in mind. Now, that being said, this movie, like I said, is incredibly lazy. It pulls every single kind of really cheap trick or cliche symbolism, imagery stuff to get an emotional rise out of its audience. It's a very, like, it's trying to get this rise out of you without putting in the legwork to actually earn that emotional response. Like, the whole film, really, I never really even got a sense of who Nat Turner was as a person. And this is somebody that Nate Parker wants to be compared, wants to be shown, wants this man to be remembered as, I guess, a revolutionary figure, as a very important person that led up to the Civil War. Because there is an image at the end of the film that connects like the revolution of the Civil War, connecting it to what happened to Nat Turner. So this is a guy that Nate Parker wants you to remember, like wants you to put on the same put in the same category as like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King or Gandhi, even as like a revolutionary figure. But I never really understood Nat Turner as a person in this movie. I mean, he was a real person, and I'm sure he has a fascinating life story that could have made for a great film. But Nate Parker's all he's really interested in is trying to connect this story to modern times and trying to get you to get angry. Like, he wants you to be angry. He wants you to have conversations coming out of the film. But for a movie that's like practically a biopic, and it goes through the entire life of Nat Turner. Not from the moment that the film started to when it ended did I ever really understand Nat Turner as a person. Like, his motivations are very muddled in this movie. Like, it's strange. And I think one of my biggest grievances with the movie is that Nate Parker, like, twists history. Like, sure, I don't mind a lot of the time when movies based on true stories kind of twist the truth just a little bit to maybe suit a more interesting narrative, or to get the plot moving. But here he twists Nat Turner's motivation for starting this slaughter, not from being this prophetic thing from God, this sign from God. I mean, that's brought up, but the majority of what kicks it off is him, his wife getting beaten and gang raped, and then one of his I guess friend's wife being beaten and raped, and then he's whipped for baptizing a white man, which is it's not even really clear that those happened in real life. It's not even really clear if Nat Turner had a wife or a daughter to begin with, and it's just it's kind of offensive in a way, kind of offensive to me, for someone to take a subject as touchy as this, with a history that's based on a true story, and then break it and mold it back into this thing that fits their own political agenda to show how Nat Turner connects to modern times, and how the suffering of the women in his life are a part of what caused him to start this slaughter. And it's just such a confusing movie, motivation wise, writing wise. It's just, and then of course it has to go for the scenes where we see the whipping, we see the people being hung and stabbed and burned alive, and it just, and not to say I'm desensitized to this. And it's not that I don't want movies about slavery to happen. I do. I don't mind movies being made about slavery. I think it's a part of history that is swept under the rug in our modern society, that a lot of people like to forget. I mean, a lot of movies come out that are about the Holocaust, or things that are the horrible things that are happening in Asia or Africa or any of the other continents. But or Mexico, it's whenever we focus on an atrocity in our past, it's people just kind of just want to let that go and forget it. But this movie is just it doesn't start a conversation on slavery or how Nat Turner's actions affect our modern times, because it doesn't put in the legwork. It doesn't give you an interesting character in Nat Turner. He's just a blank slate. It doesn't give you any kind of meat to chew on. It's just such a hollow, vacant movie. It's just going through these motions of the violence and then the symbolic stuff, and it doesn't mesh well with any of the like the actual history that they're putting in. There's such little in here that actually happened that it's like the revolution, the party that Nat Turner started, they never even made it to Jerusalem, where the climax of the film is. So it's like, I don't know why. I do know why. They did it because the movie wants to create Nat Turner's story around this like weird action movie rape and revenge fantasy that it has. Like it's a fantasy. I'm sorry. I know that sounds maybe a little disrespectful, but it's true. This whole thing with his wife getting beaten and gang raped never happened. The whole thing with his slave friend's wife being beaten and raped, that never happened. I'm definitely sure slaves were beaten and raped, but in the context of this movie, in the context of this story, never happened. These characters, like Samuel, the slave owner that he has, that wasn't even his owner when he started this revolution. It was like one of his first owners, and then he sold him to somebody else. And it's never been proven that Nat Turner killed the slave owner. And then there was this like evil villain, like there's a main villain of the movie that nearly kills Nat Turner's father, and then he and Nat Turner have this final fight at the end where it even has the moment where the guy is strangling Nat Turner, and Nat Turner is like reaching for a knife that's nearby, and it's like an action movie. It's such a weird thing to bring into this story, where it first starts out as, like, we want to tell you the story of this man that actually existed and led this big revolt against slavery, but we're gonna break what actually happened and create our own shit and twist it around this rape and revenge fantasy mixed with an action movie and mixed with a slave drama. And it doesn't work because it's because you can tell from the whole movie that something is off. And even if I never knew what was going on, even if I never knew the history behind Nat Turner, because I was taught about Nat Turner like back in high school, and I knew about him. So going into this movie, knowing what I knew, I'm just sitting there like, this never happened. This never happened. Why is this in the movie? This never happened. And then and don't even, like, the way, the laughable symbolism that is in this movie, where you have, oh my god, so you have visions that now, this could have been interesting. This could have been interesting if they had gotten rid of the wife thing, because that's a big chunk of the story, that he's romancing his wife-to-be, and it's like this creepy meet cute that they have where he persuades his master to buy the slave because he gets attracted to her, and it's like, it's just weird and creepy and it's uncomfortable. And you have this, like, get rid of all that shit. Get rid of all the romancing of the wife. Get rid of the somewhat conflicted relationship that Nat Turner and his slave master have. Get rid of all that shit and just focus on, him being a so-called prophet, him receiving images from God, so to speak, and have that be like this mythical thing where, like, that was a big reason why Nat Turner started this revolt, because he got visions from God, and they show some of them in the movie. But it doesn't work in the movie because it conflicts with everything else that's been established, like him being angry over his wife being raped, him being angry over some other woman in his life being raped, his grandma dying, stuff like that. And that could have been interesting if they had focused on him having divine intervention, and him being very spiritual, and him receiving images from God, like what they do in the movie, like the solar eclipse. And there's a scene where he has dreams of him as a child being taken out into the woods to be blessed by a shaman, and and they have this tribal stuff going on where they like paint their faces and dance around him, and then there's an image that he has, a vision that he has of a corn, or like corn in someone's hand, and it starts to bleed, which is silly by itself. But in the context of him being this self-proclaimed prophet, that could have worked. That could have been interesting, but they don't do it. They don't fully commit to it. Instead, it's meshed with all this other bullshit. And the big image of the movie, the moment where I almost was like chuckling to myself because of how cliche and ridiculous it was. So, and this is spoilers, but if you know history, this should not be a spoiler. There is a scene at the end where, after his revolution fails, there's a scene where you see this like montage of slaves being hung and set on fire and killed, and it's a horrible scene. But there is an image of a black boy hung by the neck from a tree, already dead, and the camera is zoomed in on his chest, and there's like this little butterfly on the chest, like fluttering, and it's already that's I'm like rolling my eyes, like, oh my god, really? You couldn't have something else, like you couldn't be more creative with your symbolism. So you have that already, and then the camera zooms out, and you see all these other people hung on the tree, and it's a very sad moment. But the thing that kills that scene, that kills that whole montage, is when they bring in the most obvious song you could put on for a scene like that, which is "Strange Fruit" by Billie Holiday. Well, in this situation, it's the famous cover by Nina Simone. So, in a movie that's already not particularly subtle to begin with, it ends with like knocking you over the head with this like symbolism 101 scene with this anachronistic song, and it's just so fucking cliche and silly. It's a silly movie because of how undisciplined and of how mixed it is. It's like such mixed messaging with Nat Turner as a person, Nat Turner as a father, Nat Turner as a husband. It's just, it tries to be all these different things, and it tries clumsily to connect to those modern times, to what's going on, and it doesn't work. This whole film does not work. It is lazy. It is lazy filmmaking. And, okay, well, are there things that I liked about the film? I guess, sure. I mean, I think the most of the acting is solid. I think Nate Parker does an okay job as Nat Turner in some scenes, but I just think he's kind of a boring actor. I mean, talk about the ego where he casts himself as this guy. It's just it's I don't know, something about that to me. It's like really stroking his own ego. You've got Armie Hammer who's in it, who's a decent actor in the right role, and I think he did an okay job. He's not really given much to do. He's just kind of there just to yell occasionally and talk with a southern accent. It's really, there's like, what could have been an interesting part of the movie is this master-slave relationship between Nat Turner and the Armie Hammer's character, because they played together as children, and it was very common to have slaves in your adulthood that you played with as a child, because child slaves were like pets back then. They were treated like pets. So that could have gone somewhere interesting, but they really just don't. That whole arc just ends with Armie Hammer getting like hacked to death, like gruesomely hacked to death, which never happened in real life, but happens in this movie because we have to have the killing and the gore and all that. I guess like some of the locations are nice, like where they filmed it. There's some really beautiful shots of like this large cotton field with like the sun reflecting against it. There's a scene where like Nat is running through the woods, and it's like really the symmetry of it is very nice and very appealing to look at. Even the action as shallow and kind of like weirdly exploitative action, like how grisly it is. Just on like a very shallow level, the action is done competently. The gore effects are good. They're competent. You believe it when someone gets hacked in the stomach or has like their head chopped off or is like stabbed in the throat. I mean, it looks realistic, I guess. But I guess like most of my compliments of this movie are just like what's on the surface, and some minor thematic stuff. Like I said, like the relationship between Nat Turner and his master. It's that could have been something interesting, and occasionally you get little glimpses of it going somewhere, but it never really does. So anyway, those are my thoughts on The Birth of a Nation, which I'm sure is gonna be. I'm sure I'm gonna be like in more the negative category. I've seen very mixed reception for this movie, but it's got like a positive, very positive score on Rotten Tomatoes and whatever, and it's like critics seem to really like it. So I don't know. It didn't do anything for me, and I just got fed up with all the history twisting and the beat you over the head symbolism and the lazy usage of music and the hacking dialogue, and it was just a very empty experience. I watched it and my brain just barely registered any of it, and I'm not gonna remember I even saw this movie within like a month probably. Like the last movie I saw like this, 12 Years a Slave. It's been 3 years since I've seen 12 Years a Slave, and I distinctly remember moments from 12 Years a Slave, because unlike Birth of a Nation, that's a good movie. That's a very good movie, with a director who knows what the hell he's doing, with actors who really give it their all, and a look that is beautiful. So yeah, would I recommend The Birth of a Nation? I think I'd say, like, if you're a general audience member, I'd say no. I would not recommend it. But if you're somebody that's interested in history, or like particularly like Black history, pre-Civil War history in America, I would watch it just as an example of what not to do in a situation like this when you're trying to make a film like this. So yeah, it's not a good film. It's very, very, very mediocre. Very mediocre film. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. If you like what you see, subscribe. Let me know what you thought of The Birth of a Nation if you've seen it. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Have a good one. Take care.